In the autumn of 1859, a land surveyor named William Canfield walked a ridge northeast of Baraboo, Wisconsin, running section lines through oak openings and worn prairie grass for the Sauk County plat maps. Canfield's job was to measure boundaries, not wonder at them, and for most of that autumn the work was ordinary: chains laid straight, stakes driven, numbers copied into a field book. Then, on a rise overlooking a creek bottom, his chain crossed something that was not a boundary at all. A figure shaped like a man, raised out of the earth itself, 214 feet from the crown of its head to the soles of its feet, with shoulders 48 feet across, arms slightly bent, and on its head what looked, from a distance, like a pair of horns or a headdress. It was built entirely of soil, mounded a few feet above the surrounding ground, old enough that oak trees a century old grew directly out of its chest, its outline visible only because the low autumn light was throwing a shadow across the grass that no natural rise in that ground should have made. Canfield wrote it into his notes as a curiosity. He had no way of knowing he had just recorded, for the first time on paper, the only object of its kind that would still be standing 160 years later. Every other human-shaped mound like it, everywhere else it had ever existed, would eventually be gone. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. Canfield's find had a name before it had an explanation. Locals and surveyors who came after him called it Man Mound, and it sat inside a much larger, much older pattern that stretched across the entire southern half of Wisconsin. Between roughly the years 650 and 1200 of the Common Era, the people occupying this region built earthen mounds by the thousands, not as accident or heap, but as deliberate shaped construction: bears with rounded haunches, birds with wings spread 100 feet across, long-tailed panthers or water spirits with rows of vertebrae worked into the curve of the tail, turtles, deer, geese, and in Man Mound's case and 4 others like it, human figures. Estimates drawn from 19th century survey work put the number built across the state at somewhere between 15 and 20,000, the densest concentration of effigy earthworks anywhere in North America. None of it was raised with metal tools. There were no draft animals in this part of the world to haul soil, no wheeled carts, no written units of measurement passed down for later researchers to recover. Each mound was built basket load by basket load, dirt carried by hand from nearby borrow pits and packed into shape over what was likely days or weeks of communal labor, the same families and clans returning to add height and length as the work allowed. And yet across mounds separated by 200 miles, built by people who left no ledger, no drawn plan, and no measuring rod behind, the proportions hold. A bird mound in one county keeps roughly the same wingspan to body ratio as a bird mound in another. A panther's tail curves in the same direction, at close to the same angle, whether it sits above the Wisconsin River or the shore of Lake Mendota. Whatever system dictated those proportions traveled by memory alone, carried in the hands and the eyes of builders who never needed a diagram to keep it consistent. The man most responsible for putting any of this into a permanent written record was Increase Lapham, a self-taught naturalist and surveyor working out of Milwaukee, who spent the years 1849 through 1852 traveling the state on his own initiative and later, with funding from the Smithsonian Institution, sketching and measuring mound after mound before farmers' plows reached them. His book, Antiquities of Wisconsin, published through the Smithsonian in 1855, remains the only surviving record for a large share of the mounds it describes, because the earthworks themselves did not survive to be measured a second time. Lapham was a product of his century, as much as an exception to it. Through most of the 1800s, the dominant explanation offered by American settlers for structures this size was that native peoples could not have built them, that some earlier and vanished population, unconnected to the tribes living on the land, must be responsible instead. The idea was convenient. It offered a founding population conveniently absent to inherit from, and it survived in the popular imagination for the better part of a century. Picture the work itself, reconstructed from what archaeologists have pieced together at excavated sites, because no builder ever described it on paper. A borrow pit is dug a short walk from the chosen rise, the soil carried in woven baskets on the backs of the people doing the carrying, one load at a time, up a slope, and set down along a line someone has already walked out on the ground, the shape of a bear or a bird, or a long-tailed water spirit, held only in memory and in the eye of whoever is directing the work that day. There is no scaffolding, no measuring cord staked to a center point the way a surveyor would use one. The mound rises inches at a time, across what was very likely more than one season, added to by different hands in different years, until the animal or the figure is complete enough that anyone standing at a distance can name what it is without being told. Then it is left to grass over, and the people move to the next one. It took a specific act of federal record-keeping to close that question. In 1894, the ethnologist Cyrus Thomas published the report on the mound explorations of the Bureau of Ethnology for the Smithsonian Institution, the product of roughly 2 decades of fieldwork across hundreds of mound sites in a dozen states. Thomas's report did what individual observation had failed to do for 100 years. It stated, on the authority of the federal government's own ethnological office, that the mounds were the unbroken work of the ancestors of the native peoples still living in the region, not the ruins of any vanished outside population. The story of a lost race did not survive the report's publication for long, but notice what the report could not do. It could establish who had built the mounds, in the broadest sense. It could not restore a single one of the mounds already leveled by the time the ink dried, and by 1894, the leveling had been going on for most of a century. What happened next is not a record of anyone hiding evidence. It is a record of simple removal, mound by mound, carried out in plain daylight by farmers clearing fields, cities laying streets, and counties cutting roads, each acting on nothing more sinister than the ordinary economics of land use. Surveys conducted in the 1970s compared Lapham's 1855 maps against what remained on the ground and found that roughly 80% of the mounds he had recorded were simply gone, ploughed flat, or built over so completely that no rise remained to mark them. Around Madison alone, of roughly 1,500 mounds once mapped, only about 200 still exist. Lapham's own drawings preserve the ghosts of mounds that no longer exist anywhere except on his page. The Seeley Hill Mound Group, a cluster of lizard-shaped and oblong earthworks he sketched on the north bank of the Sheboygan River in 1851, has since been built over so completely that the only proof it was ever there is the plate in his own book. The absence, at this scale, is itself the record. No single order erased 15,000 mounds, none needed to be given. An economy that treats an earthen animal as an obstacle to a fence line will clear it the same way it clears a stump, without a meeting and without a document, and the only trace left behind afterward is the gap between an old survey map and a modern one. Man Mound itself was not spared this pattern, it was spared completion of it. In 1905, road construction crews building the route that still runs past the site cut directly through the lower legs and feet of the figure, removing roughly 50 feet from what had been a 214-foot mound. The severed legs were never restored. To this day, the position they once occupied is repainted across the pavement in outline, and plastic cutouts of the missing feet sit in the pasture on the far side of the road, a modern acknowledgement laid directly over the point where the original was cut away. What saved the remainder of the figure was not a government order but a private one. In 1907, the Sauk County Historical Society, working with the Wisconsin Archaeological Society and the Wisconsin Federation of Women's Clubs, purchased the parcel of land the mound stood on before it could be plowed under, the way the 4 other human-shaped mounds that once existed alongside it eventually were. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. A county park opened around it the following year. It would take until 2016, more than a century later, for the federal government to designate what remained a National Historic Landmark, one of only about 2,500 sites in the country to hold that status, and by then it was already the last of its kind. The only anthropomorphic effigy mound left standing anywhere in North America, the other four destroyed at Laval, at Eagle Township, and at a twin site in Richland County, all in Wisconsin, all gone before anyone thought to stop it. Here is the detail that keeps Man Mound from being a settled question rather than an open one. In all the years since Canfield first measured it, the mound has never been excavated. Whether it holds human remains, the way many effigy mounds do, or nothing at all, the way some effigy mounds also do, is not a suppressed fact. It is simply an unanswered one, left that way by design, because in Wisconsin, an effigy mound is protected by law as a burial site whether or not a grave inside it has ever been confirmed. Man Mound is not an isolated case. It is simply the case with the clearest paper trail. 200 miles west, along the bluffs where the Mississippi River cuts through eastern Iowa, a chain of bear-shaped and bird-shaped mounds, numbering over 40 in a single stretch, runs along wooded terraces, the effigy mound culture favored again and again, high ground, close to water, positioned so a person standing at the mound's head looked out over the river valley below. The site is now called Effigy Mounds National Monument, established as a federal preserve in 1949, after decades of the same slow agricultural erosion that had already claimed most of Wisconsin's mounds, save this time before the erosion finished its work, rather than after. 90 miles east of Man Mound, in Washington County, Wisconsin, a cluster now known as Lizard Mound County Park, preserves more than 30 earthworks in the same family of shapes, panthers, birds, and long-bodied forms, on a wooded rise that was nearly leveled for farmland before local preservation efforts stopped the plowing in the 1950s. A third pattern sits closer to the state capital. The Four Lakes region around Madison, dense with lakes and marsh and savanna-covered ridges, is estimated to have held as many as 1,500 mounds on its own, built across roughly 2,700 years of continuous use by the people who lived along those shorelines. A conical mound at the outlet of the Yahara River into Lake Monona still stands 60 feet across and 7 feet high, dated to roughly 2,000 years old, and a partial linear mound 700 feet long survives inside what is now Edna Taylor Conservation Park. Statewide estimates place the number of mounds built over that same long span at close to 20,000, with roughly 4,000 confirmed to survive today. The pattern repeats at every scale. A period of construction lasting centuries, a period of destruction lasting generations, and a small residue, protected mostly by accident of ownership or by the last-minute intervention of a historical society, standing in for everything that came before it. What holds constant across Wisconsin, Iowa, and every other stretch of this effigy mound country is not just the placement above water, though that alignment is close to universal. It is the shape vocabulary itself, and how tightly that vocabulary maps onto the clan structures still recognized today by the region's native nations, chiefly the Ho-Chunk, recorded in earlier colonial documents as the Winnebago. Ho-Chunk clan organization divides broadly into sky clans represented by birds, water clans represented by panthers and other water spirits, and earth clans represented by bears, deer, and human or human-like forms, a threefold division that late woodland effigy builders appear to have already been encoding into the ground centuries before anyone wrote the clan system down on paper. Roughly 80% of all documented bear effigies in Wisconsin cluster in the southwestern part of the state, a concentration too consistent to be accidental and too old to be explained by any surviving written instruction, because no such instruction exists. Nobody carried a rule book between sites 200 miles apart. The consistency traveled some other way, and it arrived intact. The people best positioned to explain how it traveled are the descendants of the mound builders themselves. Ho-Chunk oral tradition, carried forward through generations without the aid of a written archive, holds that these earthworks are the direct work of Ho-Chunk ancestors, referred to in the Ho-Chunk language as Moshok, and that they were never abandoned monuments, but active, functioning parts of a living spiritual landscape. Panther-tailed mounds, in that tradition, mark the location of underground springs, treated as entrances connecting the visible world to the world beneath it. Where excavation has occurred, and it has occurred at only a small fraction of sites, given how many mounds remain protected specifically against ever being opened, the dead recovered inside tend to be positioned near the heart of the animal shape, rather than scattered through the mound at random, a burial pattern too deliberate to read as coincidence. Some archaeologists studying the mound's construction have noted that the specific animal forms drawn in the 1800 sketches do not match every detail of present-day clan iconography exactly, and have urged caution before drawing a straight line from the late woodland builders to any single modern nation. That caution is reasonable, and it is not the whole picture, because the Ho-Chunk Nation's own account of its history places its ancestors in this region, by its own telling, since before there was a Wisconsin to name it, entering the world, in the account passed down through generations, at the Red Banks near what is now Green Bay, long before Canfield ever walked a survey chain across a ridge outside Baraboo. The relationship did not end when the building stopped, sometime after the year 1200, when the archaeological record shows the late woodland effigy tradition giving way to the Oneota culture that followed it. Today, the Ho-Chunk Nation's own Department of Heritage Preservation manages tree cover, erosion, and public access around surviving mound groups in and around Madison, treating each surviving earthwork not as a ruin to be studied from a respectful distance, but as a site still owed the same care a cemetery is owed anywhere else in the country. Archaeologist Robert Birmingham, who has spent decades documenting the Four Lakes mounds, has written about the difficulty of viewing them as simple static markers on an otherwise empty landscape, arguing instead that they were built to function, to actively hold together a relationship between the visible world and the world beneath and beyond it. Whether or not every 21st century viewer accepts that framing, it is the framing offered by the people whose ancestors are the leading candidates, on every line of evidence available, for who built these things in the first place. What all of this leaves behind is not a mystery in the sense of a puzzle with a missing piece hidden somewhere, waiting to be found. It is a landscape that was mostly destroyed before it could finish being studied, leaving behind a record that is honest about its own gaps, rather than silent about them. 15 to 20,000 mounds narrowed to roughly a fifth of that number, then narrower still, farm by farm, road by road, until what remains fits inside a small number of protected parks and a handful of federal monuments, each one a fragment of a system that once covered the entire southern half of a state. The people who built that system left no ledger of names, no mason's signature, no builder's mark cast into the soil the way an iron worker might cast his name into a lintel of stone. But this record is different from a simple case of names lost to time. What was interrupted here was not a name. It was an entire living relationship between people and the land they had shaped for 600 years, cut short mid-sentence by plough blades and road crews, and then carried forward anyway, generation to generation, by people who were never actually gone, who are still here, and who never stopped being able to say what the shapes meant. Man Mound still stands where Canfield found it, 4 miles northeast of Baraboo, inside a park barely larger than a city block, its shoulders 48 feet across, its horned head raised toward the northwest, exactly as it was when the first survey chain crossed it in 1859. A visitor can walk the loop path around it in a few minutes, stand at its shoulder, and look down the slope toward the same creek bottom Canfield once mapped for section lines rather than mysteries. Its legs stop abruptly at the edge of a 2-lane county road, painted back onto the asphalt in outline, walking toward feet that were cut off before anyone thought to ask what they meant. It has never been opened. It has never been fully explained. Nobody currently living can tell you, with certainty, the name of a single person who helped raise it, and it is, as of this telling, the only one of its kind left standing anywhere on the continent, which means that whatever answer the ground beneath it is holding it in exactly one place, and nowhere else in the world. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.